I'm Kevin Davis, and this is the Catholic Family Podcast. And well, as we get back rolling with our normal podcast routine, we are happy to be joined by, one of our routinely joining guests, and that is Introibo, one of my favorite guests to have on. And I've had a great response from people who listen to the podcast who really love what he brings to the table. And that is well-researched topics, and topics that are kind of taboo, things that people don't really want to talk about, things that are a little bit sketchy or scary. And recently we've been talking about occultism and occultism in society. We've talked about yoga, we've talked about movies and rock and roll, and today we're going to talk about occultism in the form of imaginary friends. Now, I am really curious to hear about this one, as I imagine you all are as well. But before we get to that, I do want to bring our presenting sponsor for today's show. That is Fidei.email. Now, I imagine a lot of you guys out there, like me, have Gmail as your email service because, it's easy and it's free and uncomplicated, and you can do Google Drive, all this fun stuff. But, does anyone ever wonder why it's free? Why is Gmail free? Why is Facebook free? Why is Twitter free? Well, nothing's free, right? Obviously, these are companies that are making money, and they're making money by selling our confidential they're selling us pretty much. Everything that we do, everything that we say and we type and we write is being sold to somebody by Google, by Gmail, by Facebook, etc. And so what Fidei.email does, and it is a Catholic-run company, is takes away that whole worry. So Fidei meaning faith. It gives you the faith to know that your emails, everything that you're doing online, at least in terms of Fidei, is going to be safe and reliable. And it's going to be something that, it's going to cost something because, everything costs. Gmail is technically free. I'm not paying into it, I suppose, but the money is being taken from somebody, and it's because of my information. So go and check it out. I'm going to attach a link to Fidei in this podcast show notes. Highly recommend it, again, if you want to go and get a little bit safer. And if you want to just support a good Catholic company, Fidei.email. So after that long introduction, Introibo, thank you so much for being patient. I will also, of course, attach your blog, which is fantastic. I'll attach that in the show notes as well. You publish something every Monday. Anyway, finally, please tell me about imaginary friends.
Well, thank you for having me, Kevin. And it's good to be back talking about this much needed topic of the occult. And this podcast, I'll be talking about imaginary friends. Now, as I had said, we're experiencing an occult revival, an occult explosion, an occult invasion, however you want to term it. It is more pervasive in society now, I would say, at any time than back in the ancient Israelites when they're surrounded by the pagans. And as a result, Satan targets the innocent, and who's more innocent than a child? And so there's a lot of reasons as to why this is happening, to why the demonic influence on children is on the rise. And it is, of course, we have the structural reasons, I'll call them. Those are the reasons, the great apostasy and the lack of moral guidance from the church, which has been driven underground, so to speak. And it also comes from the garbage that is ubiquitous. You see it on television, on the radio, in the music. I mean, we've covered some topics now, listening to the rock and roll music and all the rest of it. There's a lot out there. And I also think that children are, because they are innocent, I think they can see things sometimes more easily than adults who are skeptical of things and who will tend to dismiss things. It's good to dismiss things because the church doesn't want us to jump to supernatural conclusions every time something happens. There are people, unfortunately, who are like that. Anytime something happens, I know people it's either a conspiracy or Satan is coming to get us. That's not it. All right. But you have to have a healthy skepticism and also be aware that there are supernatural influences. Now, let me say from the outset, so that no one thinks that I am a conspiracy nut or that I am, seeing demons under, under every blanket, behind every door, and waiting for us at every moment. Most children who have imaginary friends is completely normal. It is nothing wrong with it, and it can actually be a healthy outlet. And that is true. I spoke to I was at a dinner with my wife, and we met a very prominent New York City psychiatrist. And I was speaking to him about this topic, and he said that, yes, it's true that imaginary friends are healthy. There's usually nothing wrong with them. On occasion, it can be two things that it can be, and that's on rare occasion. There's something known as DID, which is dissociative identity disorder. And it can be a manifestation of a child having, that's when a child hears noises and attributes it to something outside of himself, but it's really not.
So it's like schizophrenia.
Well, that's early onset schizophrenia is something different.
Okay.
It's similar to it. It's similar, but not the same thing. To have child onset schizophrenia is extremely rare, but it can happen. The DID is more likely.
Mm-hmm.
But in either case, that would be cause for concern, obviously, and they need to get medical and psychiatric treatment for that. But like I said, mostly it's either lonely kids who are looking for who don't have a companion to play with. It's also kids who are very creative and intelligent, and they're looking for an outlet for their creativity, and they make up a friend so that they can bounce ideas. And they're really, instead of like talking to yourself like adults do, they're talking to something, and they're just imagining something outside of themselves. Nothing wrong with that. Little girls that have tea parties with their, imaginary friend, and they're talking, all innocent. But there's something that goes beyond that. And I have only what I believe to be, and this is my own personal life, 2 times that I believe I came in contact with something evil. And the first time I was 10 years old, and it dealt with someone else's imaginary friend. And the story I'm about to relate is true and accurate to the best of my knowledge and belief. I'm only changing the names. All right. And when I was 10 years old, living here in New York City, I lived in a poor section of New York City in an apartment with my parents. And we had a couple of neighbors. I'm going to call them Jim and Lisa. And they're going to be having a cramped apartment for the next 2 weeks because Lisa's brother, who I'll call Bob, and his wife and their 2 children, Sarah was age 11 and Timmy was age 5 at that time. So one is a year older and one was 5 years younger than me. We'd be staying in a very tight quarters until they could move into their new apartment, which was not that far away. It was cheaper and nicer than the one that they had, and the timing was off between leaving their old apartment and entering the new one, so they needed that time, and they couldn't afford to stay at a hotel or anything, so they were staying with Jim and Lisa. So they found storage for their things and just enough money to move in. And Bob was a nice enough fellow. He was like my father. He was a World War II vet, and he served from 1944 to 1948. And he was raised in a strict Irish Catholic home, but he had no use for religion. He was not a religious man at all. He did not follow the Catholic faith. And while stationed in occupied Japan after they surrendered, he met a woman, Hinata. And again, that wasn't her real name. I know what her name was, but I'm using that. She spoke broken English, had very limited vocabulary, and she mostly learned that from the American soldiers who were stationed there. So Bob asked for her hand in marriage, and her parents agreed. And after he was honorably discharged from the U.S. Military, he married her in a civil ceremony in California. So in search of a better job, he moved and came to New York. Hinata was a practitioner of Shinto, and it's a pagan Japanese religion which is basically animistic. Now that means when you're animistic, they believe in spirit entities that inhabit all things. And it is pantheistic. I went over what that was last time. Again, you're going to see this coming up. Here it is. It's pantheistic, and it's very superstitious. They have all kinds of things you have to do. If you do a certain, the old step on a crack, break your mother's back. It's not too far away from what they do. They have, if you do this, oh my goodness, you have to do this. Otherwise, spirits will come, that type of thing. And neither of the children were baptized or taught anything in Christianity. They had no religion whatsoever. It was a hot summer day, and I was playing catch in the street with a couple of the neighborhood kids. And Sarah was watching us with her brother and asked if she could join us and play. And I said, sure. We let her play, and she told her extremely well-behaved brother to sit on the curb and watch, because he wasn't allowed in the street. His parents didn't want him going in the street. So as it grew dark, we went onto the sidewalk, and most of the adults were hanging out outside as well, because the heat was very oppressive, and the building had no air conditioning. We just had window fans, which don't do very much, except move around the hot air if you've ever used them.
Exactly.
So my parents were talking to 4 adults who wanted to stay outside as long as possible before squeezing in for night. You know, it was going to be a tight squeeze for them. And Timmy was thirsty, and my mother asked me to use my key to enter the apartment and let in Sarah and Timmy, and the 3 of us could get some cold milk. So while I was inside, I turned on the lights and began serving my 2 guests milk before filling my own glass. And Timmy had his first bad moment I had ever seen. He says, "I don't want any." And he pushed it away, and the glass spilled. So the milk went all over, and his sister got very upset and said, "You better behave or the obaki will come and get you." And I'm like, what's an obaki? So I'm thinking here it's a Japanese boogeyman, like, which I hate when parents do that, by the way. I would like to tell them, what are you doing? You want to give your child the fear of the dark. Way to go, mom and dad. So, but I was thinking this was it.
That real quick, that's a really, I was just talking about that with my wife. Sorry to segue, but that's really interesting that you say that, because I read in a book written in the 1800s at some point, you know, how to raise a Catholic family. And one of the points was to never scare your children, never shock them, never scare them. And that's a really interesting thing, because I think there's a lot of people who, you know, like the, you know, jump scare, you know, that they scare their kids, or they wear a scary mask to get the reaction. And you see these videos all over the place. And as you said, it's kind of a terrible thing, because I mean that trust that a child has in their parents, especially, I think it has to be at least just a little bit taken away if you scare them even just once, like really scare them. And so I think that's a really interesting point that you bring that up. But anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fear of the dark. I mean, you know, do you really want that in a child?
Right.
Because they're going to believe you, your dad, your mom. You know?
Exactly. Yep.
So this is what I thought it was. So I said, all right, you know, Japanese boogeyman story. And so I did ask, I said, what is that? And Sarah said, the obaki. My mother tells us when we misbehave, he's going to come and get us. So like, all right, so it is a Japanese boogeyman. And then I saw Timmy's face, and he looked absolutely terrified. I mean, like, the color was out of his face, terrified. So I'm like, they must have really scared this kid. And then Sarah pointed into the next room and said, "See, the obaki." And right then, the lights in my apartment went out. The door that I had left open shut, and there was a large shadow in the room. And I was scared. I literally, wet my pants. That's how scared I was. And we screamed, and I said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "I didn't do anything. It's the obaki." So I said, let's get out of here. She goes, it's him. So we grabbed Timmy, we ran for the door. I grabbed the door, and it was like somebody was on the other side pulling it shut from the other side, an adult. So I remember something I heard my father said. I said, "Sweet Jesus, please help us." And in the name of the holy name, the door opened, and we got out. And we were crying, and it was, you know, everyone, the adults were like, what went on? So we told them, and they thought we were making things up. The superintendent was called. No one reported any power outages. When we got outside, the lights went back on. And the superintendent said no circuit breaker was ever tripped. So my parents were angry, and they thought I was lying. My mother wanted to punish me. But my father talked it out of it, saying, you know, they're just kids, and they probably just, you know, had their imaginations running wild and stuff like that. One person, didn't make any comment or accuse either of us imagining things, and that was Hinata. She stood there very solemn. Now, obaki is translated as ghost, but in Shintoism, it refers to a supernatural entity that can shapeshift and appears as different things. And it is considered one of the most evil things in Shintoism. Hanada called on these things as part of her religion. And when Bob and his family left, I never wanted to speak about it again. I tried to put it out of my mind. I didn't want people to think I was a liar, a kid who imagines stuff, or worse yet, that I was losing my mind. So it wasn't until it took over a year before I was able to sleep again without a nightlight, speaking about fear of the dark. And I tried to put it out of my mind. I was basically successful. I kind of suppressed it because that's what people do when they have painful memories in childhood. They suppress them. But I know what happened. And as traditionalist Catholics, we know about our guardian angels. And I had a picture of a guardian angel on the post of my bed as a little kid. And I would say my night prayers in front of it. And these angels, as we know, protect us, guide us, and so much more. But no one seems to ask what the fallen angels are doing at the same time. So if our angels are working nonstop to secure our salvation, wouldn't the forces of hell be working just as hard to secure our damnation, especially now in the great apostasy? So what caused me to relate that was the fact when I was at work, it's going back a couple of years ago, one of the associates, senior associate, who is a big skeptic, and he knows that I'm religious, and he was a big skeptic, and he doesn't really believe in much of anything. And he said he had a case that was really vexing him, and I'm wondering why he's telling me, because I'm not on the case. He didn't do anything to divulge or to violate the attorney-client privilege, but it was interesting what he said. He said that his clients were a young couple with a 5-year-old son, and he was very shy, and there weren't many kids his age with whom he could play. So his mother heard him playing in the room one evening and talking as if someone else was there. And his mother heard him playing in his room one evening and talking to this kid again. And so she said, when he was going to bed, "Who were you talking to?" And he said, "Hannah. She's my new friend." So his mother thought the imaginary friend was cute and a way not to feel so lonely. So everything was fine. And one day he was looking rather sad, and his mother said, "Maybe go upstairs and play with Hannah." And he says, "I don't want to play with her anymore." And his mother inquired why. He said, "She wants me to do bad things." And the startled mother said, "Bad things like what?" And he said, "She wants me to kill myself." So the startled mother immediately took them to the grandparents' house, and they made an appointment for a child psychologist right away, and they wanted to get the kid tested, which was the right thing to do. They thought it was suicidal ideations manifesting themselves externally, and probably, DID or perhaps even early childhood schizophrenia. So while awaiting, they were staying at the grandparents because grandparents could stay there all the time and watch them very closely. And they said to the grandparents, "Don't ever let him out of your sight." The parents left their kid, and they got rid of all cleaning agents and anything else that he could possibly use to hurt himself, swallow things, and made sure everything was child-proof in the sense that he couldn't hurt himself. And the last thing they did was to tie up all the knives in the kitchen and keep them locked up in the top shelf of the bedroom closet. Now, they didn't tell anybody what they had done in the house. So when they went and finally picked up their son to take him home, they were getting some results, and it didn't seem there was anything wrong with the kid, at least so far. The mom slept in the boys' room, and dad stayed in the main bedroom. And the next morning at breakfast, he said to his parents, "You're making it hard to kill myself. You hid the kitchen knives in the bedroom closet where I couldn't get them." Now, there's no way he could have known that. And the mother said, "How did you know what we did?" And his answer was 3 words: "Hannah told me." So my source, my attorney friend, wouldn't tell me anymore. And he says he wasn't at liberty to reveal more. That would be a breach of confidentiality. So I just asked him one more question. I said, "Were any of them involved in any occult activities?" And he stopped, frozen, and turned around and just gave me a look and then just walked away. I knew I hit a nerve. I knew there was something going on. So right after that, I started going into research into experiences like mine. That's when my experience all came back. Um, in all of those frightening experiences, one common thread in all of them, and yes, all of them, without exception that I have come across, had either the children themselves, a friend or parent involved in pagan or occult practices. All of them. The most common experience is in the form of imaginary friends. Right? And this is when it's not a matter of DID or schizophrenia or just a kid having fun. I think these are manifestations of demons. And if you think about it, many parents have engaged in such things as using tarot cards, Ouija boards, watching mediums on television, allowing their kids to read and watch shows depicting witchcraft, attending services of a false religion, because Vatican II sect doesn't see anything wrong with that. Do you really want your children thinking that it's fine to roll around on the floor being slain in the spirit, holy laughter and all that nonsense? Well, if they're going to see that. So I'm going to relate a couple of very scary stories that are taken directly from the newspaper.
All right. Real quickly, before you get into that, I'm curious what you think, kind of on what you're just saying. Do you think it's a problem, or are you opening up an issue when you actually watch scary movies, like movies that are about not necessarily witchcraft, but I mean, I don't know, these haunted movies, or even the ones where they're possessed or something? Do you think that's a possibility too, or is it just kind of a depiction of something that happened?
Well, I think they're dangerous indirectly as opposed to directly.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is this. Children watch these horror movies. Now, there's horror movies that are just what I call slashers. When you see, the guy in the ski mask who goes, chopping a woman up and she's screaming like for an hour and a half, and you almost hope he gets her so you don't have to hear her anymore. That's not the type that I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about the ones that involve Satan and demons and ghosts and all this other stuff. They do get ideas from that. They do get ideas, you see, and there's even there's the new Sabrina series on where she literally calls on Satan. Now, a child sees that and calls on Satan. You have yourself a serious problem. There's movies that depict the Satanic Bible. Get yourself a copy of the Satanic Bible. You're inviting evil into your life. So the movie itself, in my opinion, is not what's doing it. Rather, it's emulating what you see in that movie. And there's a lot of ones, there's a lot of movies that even give wrong ideas. Not like, for example, the movie, there was a hit movie back in, I believe, 1990 with the late Patrick Swayze called Ghost, and Demi Moore was his. And everyone was saying how great this was because, it depicts the demons taking the evil guy when he dies to hell. And, because he was in a state of sin when he died and all this. I mean, well, there's two big problems with that. The two big problems is, number one, Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore were living in sin as as cohabitation. And that's a mortal sin. Yet he went to heaven, Patrick Swayze. So it's teaching you that, well, not everything is mortal. So if you kill somebody, see, this is what most people know. If you kill somebody, you go to hell. But if you live together, what's the big deal? Oh, it's pressing on that. And the second thing, Whoopi Goldberg, who I cannot stand whatsoever, she was the one who was helping, and she was a medium. So you see, they'll give you one truth if they can sneak in a falsehood. And so you have people thinking wrong things. But I had a lot of people saying to me in the early 90s, "Oh, that's a great movie." I'm like, "No, it's not." And I had to explain to them why. And you have a lot of much worse movies now, and you have them literally invoking Satan. You have them doing all these literal. There was another one called The Craft. That was a lot of. That had a lot of. It took place in a Catholic girls' school, and it was like five girls, and a couple of them were actually well-known actors or became well-known actresses. I believe that was in the 90s as well. and they're showing the rituals that they're performing to get power. Now you get a bunch of girls, you know, for a sleepover, and they're watching this. You think they might do it? There you go.
Right.
And so that's how the motion pictures, I think, play into. That's my opinion.
Sure.
So the scary story, and there's two of them, I said, taken right from the headlines. This is not something, and of course, anyone is free to go look this up. All of my things, except for my personal story, which can't be, or what my colleague told me, but these now are verifiable. And you know, Satan hates what's pure, and children, as I said, are pure and innocent. And remember from 2 Corinthians, Satan will transform himself into an angel of light. Now, on May 31st, 2014, two 12-year-old girls at that time, Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weir, admitted they lured their friend Peyton Leutner into woods in a suburban Milwaukee park. Geyser stabbed Leutner 19 times while Weir urged her on to kill her. And Leutner was left for dead, but she somehow, this is a miracle as far as I'm concerned, she crawled out of the woods and got help from a passing bicyclist, streaming blood. And she survived. Geyser and Weir said they carried out the attack to get favor with their friend, the Slender Man, who's a fictional online horror character. Typified, he looks like he's got spidery limbs and a blank white face. And they started seeing manifestations of Slender Man who wanted to help them. And he first started out as this benevolent, imaginary friend. Then he threatened their families that he would kill them all unless they killed Leutner. They were both convicted and committed to a psychiatric hospital for 40 years. All right, now, what struck me as strange is that two girls with no previous signs of being in trouble or having any mental illness did something worse than what you see in most horror movies.
Right.
Right. Insanity is not contagious. And when I spoke to the psychiatrist, the aforementioned psychiatrist, I said, you know, I brought up this case and I said, I'm not a psychologist, but it seems a bit odd that two girls who are friends would have the exact same mental problem to the point of sharing the same exact idea. As you know, these psychotic ideations of plotting the murder in all the gruesome detail. They spent 5 months planning this out. And he said, yes, you're right. It's very, very strange, and I have no explanation for that. And this man has been published. So he has no explanation for this stuff. Now, where were the parents? Good question. Well, I went, as I did more and more research on this, two things came out that wasn't in most of the publications kept out. Not all of them, most. So I wanted to see how many actually mentioned. Only two mentioned this fact. All right. The parents, they were dabbling in the occult. They would have sleepovers, and after binging on horror movies, got the idea to use Ouija boards and the so-called game light as a feather, stiff as a board when they try to lift somebody using supernatural incantations. And it was after that they started seeing the Slender Man.
Wow. So wait, okay. that was their parents or the girls that were involved?
That was the girls doing it. Well, the parents thought there was nothing wrong letting them watch these horror movies, binging on them. Not just a single horror movie, but like, you know, hours of horror movies from the afternoon into the time they're going to go to bed. And of course, they stay up when their parents fall asleep, and then they were doing this. They were using, somebody got a Ouija board, and somebody obtained it, and they were using it. Maybe it was a friend out. They didn't say how they got the Ouija board. And light as a feather, stiff as a board, which, if anyone knows, it's when you have somebody lying down, and you put two fingers at the front of the person and towards the bottom of the person, and on the trunk of the body, and on the other side, and they say light as a feather, stiff as a board, and usually there's some incantation of a spirit involved, and then they can lift the body up about a foot or so, and it feels like they're weightless, and they put them back down again. So a lot of people who have done this say that it is true, and it scared the living daylights out of them. And the Ouija board, need I say, that's a direct contact or trying to you're calling on spirits to do that.
Right.
And it was after that the slender man appeared to them. Now, another one in 2018, two young girls, again, 11 and 12. Look at the ages. Look at the ages. And notice, too, that these things come to you in horror. If something comes to you if something comes to you after a while, it's friendly, and then if it comes to you like the experience that I had, it can't be of God. God
Right.
does not come to you in horror, in fear. Fear is not from God. If you remember the apparitions of Our Lady of Fatima, when the children saw the vision of hell, the Blessed Mother prevented them from being, scared, or they thought they would die on the spot. The Blessed Mother protected them from fear. She didn't instill fear.
Right.
So this cannot be from God. Well, in this one, these whose names have not been released due to their ages, and this comes from USA Today. All right. They wanted to murder their classmates and drink their blood and then commit suicide to go be with Satan.
What?
And the girls, ages 11 and 12, were found in the bathroom stall at their school with multiple knives, a pizza cutter, and a knife sharpener in their possession. The girls wanted to commit suicide after stabbing other students. And the plan was to kill at least one student, but hoping to kill, hopefully, 15 to 25 was the goal. And the affidavit said killing all these students was in hope they would make them worse sinners and ensure after committing suicide, they would certainly go to hell so they could be with Satan and have fun.
Yikes.
Have fun. So the girls hatched a plot after watching, guess what? Horror movies over the weekend, and they saw, but where did they get these ideas? It wasn't just from the horror movies. What they wanted to do is to wait for smaller students to come in and then drink their blood before they committed suicide. And where did they get these sick ideas at such a young age? And why would they do something like this? And when asked about their motivation, they said they were Satan worshipers. Now, you have 11 and 12-year-old. How in the world did they get to be Satan worshipers? Well, what it began with watching a horror movie that depicted Satan worship and had a satanic Bible in it. And thinking it was cool, they began researching Satanism on the web, and they thought Satan would be their friend. And they started having these talks with imaginary friends who said they could get them in touch with Satan. And then what did they do? They got a satanic Bible. And where were the parents? Again, very good question for which I don't have an answer. But that's what happened there. So these children, again, this was, if anyone wants to look this up, it happened, and it was in USA Today and several other news sources. Florida girls plotted satanic school stabbings, police say. That was the headline. All right. So now, can demons take control of children? And the answer is yes. In the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 9, 17 to 21, we read, "A man in the crowd answered, 'Teacher, I brought to you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not do so.' You unbelieving generation," Jesus said, "how long shall I stay with thee? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," the father answered. All right, so there you go. So it can happen from childhood. That's proof of the fact that it does. And the approved theologians also say this too. There's one theologian in particular who did some excellent writing on possession and demonology, and it was Father Dominic Szymanski. Szymanski was an approved pre-Vatican II theologian. He died in 1951, and most of his writings were in the mid-1940s. All, of course, approved by the magisterium. And he talks about what things would lead, children to be susceptible. And one of them, and I find that now ever so more common, is the neglect of baptism. the neglect of baptism. Now, you see, besides the fact that, well, you hear it all the time, parents saying things like, well, we're going to wait till the child grows older and let him or her decide what religion to belong to, as if, it's a matter of like picking out your clothes. No, it's not like that. And, to me, that's a form of spiritual child abuse, because when you're in original sin, you are not a child of God. You're a creature of God, of course, but you're not a child of God yet. You're in the bondage of sin and Satan. Original sin, you in the bond of sin and Satan. And, I was baptized exactly 1 month after my birth. And I was even considered a little bit late. 1 month. But now you have them waiting till they're 16, 17, 18 years old. And, to me, like I said, that's like, let's not feed him until he gets to be 16.
Right.
When he's going to die. And that's a physical death. But, children can die a spiritual death. Why keeping him under the bondage of Satan, or her under the bondage of Satan? And the theologian says that's exactly a huge problem. He said this in the 1940s.
Wow.
This was the year 1944 he was writing. Now, if he said that in 1944, while World War II was still raging, what would he say today? All right. Another thing that I found to be quite disturbing, but he writes about it, is here. Well, I'll get to that in a second, but he talks about cursing. Now, he says, cursing by those in authority, especially parents cursing their children and offering them to Satan, can cause direct diabolical possession.
Wow.
And the fact that he's talking about this, and he himself was authorized by his ordinary to perform several several exorcisms. And he writes about this. So here is a priest who was an exorcist, who researched demonology and has actually said that he's seen this, that a child was possessed due to being cursed by his parents, evil people, but it can happen. And then fortune tellers and things like this. And here's a quote from what he wrote. Those who seek information from fortune tellers, Ouija boards, or cures from spiritualists often become possessed or obsessed. They seek information not from God, but from forbidden sources. Hence, it is no wonder that the devils enter and give them even more information than they care to have. God complained of the king of Israel, is there not a God in Israel that you can consult Beelzebub, the god of Akron? Some spiritualists effect apparent cures by prayer, but afterward, the cured persons are afflicted in other ways day and night. The devil makes them pay a heavy price for services rendered. That's a direct quote. And direct invocation. Should it ever happen, God forbid, that a person, young or old, directly give himself to the evil one, possession by the devil is almost certain to follow. Now, in these horror movies, they're directly calling upon Satan. The children directly call upon Satan. Next thing you know, they're trying to kill people and drink their blood.
Crazy.
So these things do happen. And it's happening, like I said, these are taken from the newspapers. This is something I made up. It's not something I created last night. Everything I do on my website, you want to go look it up, go look it up. You'll see it's there. Everything I say, it can be backed up. Again, I have anecdotal testimony from my personal life. That can't be researched, but everything else I say can. And this is a problem. And police have said that this is happening more and more, where they're seeing this activity by young children. Two people can't dream the same dream. You have pairs of kids. They both just happen to go insane at the same time. And they're all talking to these. Now I'm going to get into what I think is part of the blame. Now, you picked up on one of it, Kevin, right away, by the horror movies and what the horror movies introduced them to. So it is indirectly a doorway. So you were very, very clever to pick up on that right away. Most parents and traditional Catholics don't pick up on that, but you did. There are other things, like how many people have heard of the Charlie Challenge? Okay, that's something too. It's inspired millions of youngsters to dabble with satanic rituals by using, it's a Ouija board made from a sheet of paper divided into quarters, into fourths. And they write yes in 2 corners and no in the remaining squares. And they make a cross by stacking one pencil on top of another and summoning a demon called Charlie, who answers to questions. right? Or even gives them instructions by turning the top pencil to point to the yes or no. Now, even the modernist Vatican, the modernist controlled Vatican commented on this one by a quote unquote priest, uh, Jose Antonio Fortea, Fortea is the Vatican II sect cleric's name. So the spirits will continue to haunt the home players after the game ended, and he personally found out of one such instance. Players have reported strange phenomena after contacting Charlie. This was also in the Daily Mirror, by the way, especially if they believe they failed to sever the spiritual link after the game. One player from Buckinghamshire claimed her laptop malfunctioned and the power failed. She said she tried to call her parents and the phone cut out. Sounds similar to what I experienced. Another from Texas said he had seen a black figure with red eyes at the top of the stairs. Others reported hearing sinister laughter and objects moving without any obvious explanation. And that was from a Vatican II cleric who said that these things have been reported and he knows that they have happened. So these things have happened. All right.
Boy, does it make you want to be sure what your kids are doing on their phones, especially. This is a great example of why I'm not going to let my kids have phones until they're, I don't know, 30 maybe. But it's crazy because I've seen some of these challenges and stuff, and I've seen some of them come from TikTok, or they come from Instagram, or whatever the kids are using these days, and you just don't know what your kids are going to be picking up. And I know less from school, I suppose, but I guess that's a danger you're just going to have. But social media, man, and horror movies, it's an interesting thing because it's been on our mind a lot lately, because again, it's that whole. I guess it's something that we've been thinking about. Why are we watching what we're watching? Why are we reading what we're reading or listening to what we're listening to? And some of the shows I've done with you have really helped to reinforce that thought. The things that we're putting into our mind, why? And I think when you start thinking about that, it really hit me with horror movies. It's like, why did I watch horror movies? Why? What was the reason for watching horror movies? And it's like to be titillated, to be scared. Why? It's a ridiculous thing, to have a negative emotion and to force myself into a negative emotion to get my heart to beat faster. It's a really bizarre thing, and I think it's really good to have this podcast, because I think it shows again. I think if there's anything that I take from this is to really remember again everything that we put into our brains, everything that we soak in. Question why are we doing this? Is it to glorify God? Is it to be scared? I mean,
very interesting you say that. Very interesting you say that, because one of my favorite quotes was told to me by a man I respect very much, a godly man, by the way, a true Catholic, and he said to me, and it's an aphorism. Maybe he got it from somewhere else. He never claimed to be the person who said this, but it's very sagacious. He said, whatever goes into your mind comes out in your life. And I've never forgotten that.
Right.
Whatever goes into your mind will come out in your life. And that is so true. And yes, I asked the psychiatrist again when I was at that party. I said, what is it with the hormone? And he says, what it is an adrenaline rush. That's exactly what they're looking. See, you don't want to. Let me get you this. Let's say you're walking down the street, right, and a big dog comes jumping out at you, but there's a gate there, and you go, ah. Now you will avoid going in front of that house again, right, because you don't want that. But if you know that it can't really hurt you because it's on a screen, but you get that same adrenaline rush, it feels good when it's divorced from reality.
Sure.
And that's why he believes a lot of people watch those horror movies. Yeah. Why roller coaster rides? Think about it. It's the same principle, although there's nothing wrong. I'm not going to sit here and tell you there's something wrong with a whole roller coaster ride, because there's not. They're fine. I've been on them. They're okay. But the principle behind it is the same. You want to be scared. Yeah. Why else are you screaming, as you go up and down, because you enjoy it. So in certain circumstances, it's fun, and in certain circumstances, it's not. And that's where the problem comes in with horror movies. It's bad, but you perceive it as good, unlike the roller coaster ride.
Right.
Another thing that parents do that is a big problem, and this happened to me. My physician, my primary care physician, is a very good man. He grew up in He didn't grow up in this country. He grew up in when there was such a thing as a Roman Catholic country. And unfortunately, he's gone over to the Vatican II sect. I argue with him over it all the time. I'm hoping that he comes over. He's 20 years older than me. He's approaching 80. And he still practices. He's one of the few people that still makes house calls, as a matter of fact. And he really cares about his patients. So one time I had a lot of stress at work, and I went to him, and he says, my mother had died maybe about a year ago. And he said to me, has your mother come to visit you yet? And I'm like, well, she died. You took care of her. You were there. And he goes, yeah, but she come to visit you. I said, what are you talking about? And he says, well, usually the spirit will come and says, wait a second. No spirits are coming to see me, but my mother or anybody else. And then I realized, a lot of people believe this stuff. And he made me aware of it. I didn't realize it. And then when I became aware of it and you start thinking about it, yeah, a lot of people say so. And they say that to their kids, like, don't worry, grandma will come and visit, and then everything becomes your grandpa, your friend, your neighbor, whoever this person is going to come and visit you. Now, that is very un-Catholic. And here's why. Okay. The church teaching on the soul after death is that, according to theologian Pohl, there's the particular judgment, and all theologians teach this, by the way, and it's church teaching. Wherever you are, the moment you die, the moment your soul separates from your body, which is death, it goes to be judged by Christ. And this will precede the general judgment when Christ comes again in glory to judge the living and the dead, as we say in the Creed, right, at Mass. So that was set up, and the Constitution Benedictus Deus of 1336, Pope Benedict XII dogmatically defined that the souls of those who depart this life in the state of mortal sin descended to hell immediately after death, and there they are subject to the infernal torments. Those who depart this light in the sanctifying grace behold the essence intuitively and face to face of God in heaven, the beatific vision. So, and those who need to expiate venial sin and the debt of temporal punishment, not fully expiated for their sins, spend time in purgatory prior to their entrance in heaven. This is Catholic teaching, and it's dogmatically defined. But does God permit souls damned or blessed to visit human beings? Only under extraordinary circumstances. This is not some, grandpa comes and visits, and your uncle will come and visit you. And when you say stuff like this, and he was well-meaning, but my mother coming to visit me? No, she's not. For example, let's take a famous case when it really did happen. Alessandro Serenelli, the murderer of Saint Maria Goretti. Okay, God did allow Saint Maria to appear to Alessandro and beg and ask him to leave his sinful life. So she forgave him, and she told him that he needed to repent sincerely or he would go to hell. Okay, and he was a changed man from that moment on because of what he had seen, and then he had true repentance, and he died penitent. So, but that you have to remember, it's possible for the souls of the departed to visit the living, but it's stressed that these visitations are rare and extraordinary events to either prove a point of the Catholic faith or to accomplish a salutary act like in the aforementioned case of Saint Maria. So she was allowed by God to appear to demonstrate God's will that she be numbered among the saints, which she was in 1950 by Pope Pius XII, and to grant the heroic virgin's desire that her killer repent, which he did. But, the Bible tells us, and the church tells us, the saved are not on earth, but with the Lord in heaven, where they keep an intimate union. And we also read where the damned go to hell and are not permitted to contact the living. So when you tell them that, grandma is coming to visit you or will visit you, and they start seeing an imaginary friend who identifies as grandma, guess what you've just invited into your home?
Yep. Right.
Yeah. You told them.
Not grandma. Yeah.
It's not grandma in your closet. No, it's not. Now, when people claim, well, what about, I saw, I saw the blinds move. That was my deceased husband coming back to visit me and all these other things. Possible explanations for these so-called ghost sightings, which is why they tell it to their kids. All right, first of all, peripheral vision. A person's peripheral vision is very sensitive to motion. So when some people already believe in these visitations from the dead, sense of random motion, they say, aha, see, that's a ghost. That's grandpa, grandma, whatever. It's not. Sleep-induced experience. Many reports of ghostly visits occur upon waking up from a dream. If the person was dreaming of their departed loved one as they wake up, sensory and cognitive abilities are impaired, and they might mistake the dream for reality. I've had that happen too. I'm sure we all have. Night terrors is another reason. The universal feature of night terrors is the inability to be consoled from a sudden burst of fear and dread, very similar to having a panic attack. And during night bouts, people usually describe as bolting upright with their eyes open, like you see in the movies. Oh my goodness, and they bolt up and they look of fear. Superstitious people, or those with false ideas about these so-called quote-unquote ghosts coming back to see you, will attribute that sensation to being haunted, or to being, to having grandma come back. Fraud and mental stability, of course. You go to one of these mediums, they'll tell you, anything that happens to you is going to be your grandmother. And people who have problems, mental problems. And the power of suggestion. You see so much of this occult garbage on the television, and the movies, the books, the internet, and from neighbors from everywhere who are not instructed in the faith. So you feel a breeze in the kitchen. It can't possibly be a defective window. No, it's your grandfather coming to say goodbye or something like that. So be careful. Be very careful with that. We should pray for our dearly departed. We should remember our dearly departed. I pray for my parents in every single holy sacrifice I attend, and I pray for them nightly. They're not coming to, I don't expect them to come and visit me.
Right.
I'm not special. And, it would be for an extraordinary divine purpose, and I don't see any coming out of that. And to say otherwise is to act against Catholic reason. And we should always act with Catholic reason, being led by our faith. And so now I'd just like to say a couple of things about imaginary friends. I'd like to finish with that and what people can do to guard themselves. First of all, according to theologian Della Porte, he says the house should be a fortress against Satan. And what that means is you should have, many people now are afraid to be called kooky if they have a lot of sacramentals in their home. That is the greatest thing you can do, to have blessed holy water, and to have your children use it, and to watch mom and dad use it is wonderful. St. Benedict medals, and of course they all have to be blessed by a valid priest. St. Benedict medals, I have them all over. If somebody has any if you have any relics of saints, I am happy to have one of my patron saint with a big statue of him.
I've got one of St. Maria Goretti.
Oh, there you go. Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's something that should, and a little altar made for it. Beautiful. Mm-hmm. These things, saying your prayers, and having your house blessed by a priest and consecrated to have the enthronement of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Mm-hmm. That is so important. I have a big statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Mm-hmm. Because where she is queen, he is king, you don't have to worry about the prince of the world coming in. And it's knowledge. Remember the prophet Hosea said, my people die for want of knowledge. If you don't know the Catholic faith and you do these things and you let your children off thinking that, it's no big deal that they're on their phone. Satan is out for the young. They're out to get the imaginary friends. The imaginary friends that they come into contact with are now, today. I wouldn't have said this 25 years ago even, or 30 years ago. But they're coming in more and more. I'm reading more about it. I'm aware of this and I'm reading about it. And this is, I believe this is a very new and serious occult problem. Now, I don't want every parent to say, oh my goodness, my kid has an imaginary friend. How do I know it's not a demon? Well, I wrote down 4 things. I did get that psychiatrist number and I called him back and I said, can I ask you a few questions? He said, sure, go ahead. So he gave me some good advice. I told him, he knows about my faith. He doesn't share it. He's a non-observant Jew, but he has been published and he did say this. So here's a couple of things. He said that, yes, having an imaginary friend is usually no reason to be concerned. But here are some reasons to be concerned. And I added some things to it from reading from theologians Della Porte, all right, and various other theologians of what they had to say. So number 1, if your child uses the imaginary friend to escape real relationships, there's an unhealthy obsession, or there may be something very wrong with the real relationships in his or her life. That came from the psychiatrist. Right? And that makes sense. If they don't want to go outside to play when they have friends available and they just want to stay inside and talk to, little imaginary Bobby or whoever, that's a problem. And it's probably a psychiatric problem that needs to be resolved. Another thing, it's one thing for your child to imagine people in general, but if your child always imagines the same person over and over and over again and refuses to ever let go of this, and it's been years, 2 years or more, that can be an addictive thought pattern and a desire for something he doesn't have. So you have to be careful that it's the same person, and he'll usually, this is a mental disorder where the imaginary friend Johnny has something like a bike, and he's projecting his need for a bicycle onto Johnny. So that's a lesser emotional problem, but it's one that has to be looked at. So I don't know, if you can't afford a bike, then maybe you could do something else, but it's obsessive thinking, and that can lead to other psychological problems. So it's to be looked out for. Now, these two fall under the spiritual realm. All right. He said some things, but he's going to do his psychobabble on this one. So, he's not a believer, and he said this. You're probably not going to like this. I said, well, you're right. But here's what I came away with. If your child blames the imaginary friend for sinful choices, why did you do that when I told you not to do it? Well, little Bobby made me do it. There's a problem. It could be an immature attempt to shift blame. Can be. Well, it wasn't me. It was my imaginary friend. So, make him stay in the room, not me. But it may be a sign of being influenced by something supernatural. And this is a big one. This is the big red flag, if you want to call it that. If the imaginary friend scares him, if he's afraid of it, all right, and why would a child, you have to ask yourself, why would a child dwell on something that scares him? Why is he staying away from it? And if it's telling him to harm himself or to harm other people, the vision is being forced on him, which means it's either a serious psychological problem, like early onset schizophrenia or DID, or it is indeed then a diabolical influence. So if it's not one of those four things, you have nothing to worry about. And if you do have one of those four things, I suggest to all parents to please don't think this is just going to go away by itself. Be a good parent and intervene appropriately. And if you need the advice of a good traditionalist priest, go and get it.
No, it's really fascinating, and it's something I'm trying to remember because I had imaginary friends, but I think it was, purely childish, play. I don't think there was. I don't ever remember for sure. I don't ever remember being scared, or if I had so many brothers too that if I had a chance to play with them, I would. But there was still some sort of imagination. So I think that was pretty okay. It makes me feel better because I told you before as I came into the show, I was like, oh man, I was pretty worried. but no, it's fascinating, and I think that as you say, I think it's a pandemic, and I think that you're going to see more and more of it. And I think look what happened during the pandemic. You look at all the suicides and whatnot you had, and a lot of these were kind of spiraling on top of each other, because some kids, they had their own depression or whatever, and then they heard someone else did it, and so okay, well, the thought of suicide kind of came to their mind, and it's kind of a spiraling thing. And I think that it seems like that seems to almost be the case as well with these weird occultish type things that I think is happening more and more. And as we've said several times now, I think horror movies are really where it's at. So I think what I come away with is really thinking that just don't watch them. Just don't watch. I mean, kids are adults. I mean, what's the point? What are you trying to accomplish? Why even do it? Why open yourself up to that kind of stuff? And otherwise, yeah, I think as you say, if you're parents, well, watch what your kids are doing. Pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, Christ himself said, to those who much is given, much will be expected. Parents, God bless them. You have to pray for your parents because they have a huge responsibility before God to conduct little souls to heaven. And you can't be negligent, especially now. It's harder to be a parent. In my opinion, it's harder to be a parent now in 2023 than virtually any time before. So God bless all the parents out there, and just remember, you got to be on top of your kids. You just can't let anything be taken for granted. And you have to watch what they're watching, who they're friends with. Your idea of holding the phone until they're 30 is a good idea. Well, maybe 29.
Well, and at 30 they can join the cloister. So then
there you go.
we're settled. But no, absolutely, and yeah, especially with media, and I mean, be so careful with what they're taking in, and I mean, if you want my opinion, don't give them almost any access to the internet. Definitely no access that is not completely controlled, because it's just, as you say, it is something that our generations have had to deal with that no one else ever has in history. I mean, there was always sin, there was always evil, there's always corruption, but now it's in your hand. The size of your hand is almost limitless in terms of what you can see and hear, and it's just terrifying, and really more terrifying than anything else I think we've talked about in this show. But I hope that as you say, people are scared just enough to take these things seriously, but not too scared to not come back for another podcast with Introibo, because we definitely hope to have him back to continue this series on occultism in society. I know we have other topics to talk about. I know we may go back to rock and roll. He just came out with something about homeopathy, which is a very touchy subject, but we just might approach that too in the future. Introibo, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on and describing exactly the issues with imaginary friends and what that means. And again, remember, everybody, the spiritual battle that is going on around us, and what sin and grace does to affect that spiritual battle, which is very, very real. So, Introibo, thank you so much. And until next time, God bless you.
Thank you, Kevin.